2, 1.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everyone. It's great to have you with us for our 5th edition of Big Issues at St. Paul's. And my name is Jonny Grant. I'm the vicar here at the church, and it's really great to have you with us tonight. We want to thank you for joining us with everything else going on in the city between St. Patrick's Day and the America's Cup. We're really pleased you're here with us tonight, because we're looking and exploring a really big issue, an important issue tonight, which is poverty and social inequality in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And as we go tonight, we're going to be exploring this over the next hour and a half. We'll be looking at what poverty actually is in this country. How do we define it and measure it? How widespread is it? What are the main causes and drivers of it? And I think for us, most importantly of all, is how do we get involved in being part of the solution? And I think, that's one of the key issues we're looking at tonight is what does it mean for us as followers of Jesus, as his church, to be actively involved in these stories of hope and transformation. So we're looking forward to tonight. It's going to be a wide-ranging conversation, and we're really thankful to have a wonderful panel of guests with us tonight. And I can't think of a better guides for such an important and complex issue. And so I want to welcome all of our guests tonight. I want to welcome especially Chris, first of all, who is the CEO of City Mission, Auckland City Mission. And Chris, after 5 years of being our city missioner, is actually coming to the end at the end of this month. And so we're hugely privileged to have you with us tonight, Chris, to share your experience and your story. And Chris has been a champion of the mission's work to alleviate desperate need in the city. He has led the fundraising and build of the Homeground Project, which is a purpose-built facility in the middle of the city to bring together a range of services to address homelessness in the city. So great to have you with us, Chris. Thanks for joining us. Then Jenilee Reddy is oversees community partnerships at Whakaora Tangata. And this is an organisation which focuses on restoring futures for vulnerable whānau in South Auckland, but also in the far north. And it does that through courses, counselling, ongoing support, and coaching and mentoring. And Jenny, I just want to say it was such an enormous privilege to be part of your recent graduation. With those just graduating from that recent course, and seeing yesterday just incredible stories of restoration and just radical life change really in those that we met. So thanks for having us along to that. Kia ora, thanks for joining us tonight. And finally, last but not least, is Ronji Tanielu. Talofa lava, Ronji. He is a policy analyst. He is prominent in the media, I think it's fair to say, and he works with the Salvation Army. And Ronji co-authored Salvation Army's recent report, State of the Nation on Poverty and Inequality last month. So that's pretty fresh research, and we're looking forward to hearing some of your reflections on that. All right, well, as we go tonight, we invite you to ask questions. And as you ask those, they'll be coming down our comment thread, and the panelists will be able to see those. We will do our best to get to some of those questions as we go tonight, but we would ask you if you could keep those questions rather than comments, just so that our panelists can really clearly see the questions that are coming through tonight. All right, well, as we get going, as we go through tonight, we know that poverty in this country has got its own story. But we want to start actually just by asking each of our panelists, and Chris, maybe if we start with you, just the question of why do you do what you do? What drew you into this particular area? What has made you passionate about being involved in this?
Kia ora, Johnny. E te whanui ko tā mai nau tēnei pō, tēnā koutou katoa. Just greet you all. Thank you for the opportunity and this privilege of sharing. I guess before I start, I just was reflecting on the people, and I think all of us would say this. The way we've been drawn into this work has been through other people, not through some intellectual study trying to work it out, but it's generally relationships. I would imagine that have somehow pulled us into this. 50 years ago, I was involved in anti-Vietnam War protests when I was at Canterbury University, and just started to get the first taste, I think, of that things weren't right in the world. I was a pretty naive student then. And I read Mother Teresa, Something Beautiful for God, a book by Malcolm Muggeridge. And something about what they were doing in Calcutta to human beings, with human beings who others had just thrown literally on the rubbish dump, touched me deeply. And I attempted to go up to Calcutta and work there in a refugee camp with Mother Teresa. And it didn't work because the Indian government just denied visas at the last minute, but it set me on a trajectory that I haven't left for 50 years ago. I think that was where the call was. So I finished my studies, psychology, and eventually I went off to South Korea and spent a lot of time living in a slum, most of the time there in the 70s, in a pretty horrible slum in Seoul at the time. And I think already I could see a change in myself and my understanding of what poverty was. I think when I first got attracted to Mother Teresa and the work, it was something about pity that was kindled in me. When I started to live in this slum for years, that changed to quite different. I began to realize that the people I were pitying actually were gifted and were gifting me. And it was the beginning of that change of being gifted by the other instead of thinking I was doing for or to the other. And that's how I'd started. I'm going to go and solve poverty or injustice in Asia. And this relationship thing started to change me. And I did, shortly after that, I completed a thesis on this very subject in the States. And it was basically, how do people who are living in the worst of circumstances show such heroism and beauty and inspire the rest of us? In the worst of humanity, sometimes the very best of us emerges. And so trying to work out why or how does that happen? What drives people when things are so bad, when you're living in utter, terrible conditions? So that drew me to that. And then eventually, after 25 years, 20 years out of New Zealand, I was called home, and I went up and for the next 25 years worked in Northland in Aotearoa. Again, pretty much in that space with people on the edge. But no longer it was pity, a place of pity for me. No longer was it a place of just of listening. I began to understand that there was a major justice issue involved here. That poverty wasn't just being without or being less, but somewhere along the line it almost been an intentionality. Something had gone wrong to lead to this, something that is often way back or invisible. And of course, for me, it was this beginning of the understanding of colonization in our own country that created what we understand as poverty today. So I worked in that situation, very, very, very aware, and I think I even got more angry as time went on. Why were fellow New Zealanders living in cow sheds that leaked, in lean-tos? Why were fellow Kiwis not being able to afford food on the table? And why were they just being marginalised and almost judged by so many others? So that kind of thing. So that's really was my life. I worked in health. I have a background in that, and worked up there for 25 years. 5 years ago, I was called really out of the blue. It was one of the bigger shocks of my life to take on this role as City Missioner in Auckland. I did know where Auckland was, but it wasn't a place really I was familiar with. So I came down and I began to even understand in the work that we do here in Tamaki Makaurau, yet another aspect of poverty. It was frightening for me, frightening to see how many people are struggling in this country. And again, most of the people we serve are Māori. Most actually, half would actually whakapapa back to Northland where I'd come from. And so I was seeing yet again the causes. But what I guess over the last 5 years, if I had to say one thing that's hit me more than others is that the result of severe trauma in people's lives. So poverty is poverty. But if you dig deep to the other story, you will generally find severe, often historical trauma, or perhaps even more recent, that has led to that. So, so many of my paradigms have been broken. I cringe almost when I look back to my naivety when I started this journey 50 years ago. And even a little bit of my arrogance. I thought I knew and I was going to do too. Now I realize how little I do know and I just have this desire to listen and understand more. I will not, though, resolve from the fact is that in the last 50 years, it is I who have been gifted by this work. Simply that, I am so much blessed in that. And so I'd end by saying I acknowledge all the people who have given me the time and understanding to teach me in the journey that I've had.
Hey, thanks so much, Chris. Yeah, it's wonderful just to hear that and understand a bit of the journey. Jenny, do you want to give us a sense of why you do what you do and what's brought you to this point?
Yeah, awesome. That was amazing, Chris. Thank you. My connection is a very personal one and actually stems from my family. Well, I'll start at the beginning. We're from South Africa, and there's a lot of, we see things in South Africa, a lot of poverty, injustice. And my parents were actually missionaries there. They did mission work. And we moved over to New Zealand in 2001, and we landed somehow in South Auckland. And through my parents just being in the community, they met families and got connected to families, and just worked with families in a really relational way, and just through loving people and seeing a lot of the struggles that they were facing. And our family did not have much either. And so with the little that they had, as a family, we worked with the families that we saw. My parents sold their house and funded some of their community work. And from the very beginning, their hearts just poured out to the people that they saw. They saw something that they hadn't seen as much in South Africa, where there was just this cycle of trauma that was just perpetuated over generations and generations, and there was just no help, nothing coming in to stop that. And they did what they could with the little that they had, and just worked to, in practical ways, be the hands and feet of Christ. What does that look like? Going in, working. My mum tells a story of giving this young 15-year-old mum a piece of advice about, if you do this to your baby, this will happen. She had a night's sleep and then she was better. And there was just so much trauma that they were seeing going on. And over time, I was able to have my own experiences. I went to university, I studied politics and economics, and I had that kind of understanding as well. But then in a very personal way, the families that I'd grown up with in New Zealand that we were working with, and over time, formally, our family starting to Whakaora Tangata. Now it's grown, we've got about 20 staff, but doing that same thing, very relationally working with families, particularly in South Auckland. We've now spread to the far north, but we've realized that a clinical approach just didn't work. It didn't work with the families that we were working with. And it didn't even take just handing out money. It didn't take anything. It took loving people and walking alongside them and seeing where they are at and giving them insight and working with them into, why are you here? What has happened in those early years? How has it shaped you into where you are now? And how do we break that cycle, and so that you and your family are well, and that your children are able to access opportunities, and the family unit is stable. There's so much family breakdown that we see, and starting from the very first part of our family working with other families, we saw that was a model that actually worked. And just relationally, with what we have, bringing that in, that's kind of what connected my heart to the space, and kind of being able to sit in both worlds, where I came from that place. Our family was involved in seeing whether we could get food vouchers and stuff like that, and then growing up and studying and being in the corporate world, and then coming into the space back, sitting in both worlds, seeing material poverty, but also spiritual poverty. What is this, and how do we address this? And that definitely has connected my heart to it, and particularly seeing some of the families we worked with 10, 15 years ago, seeing where they are at now, seeing their children in university, something that would have never been, they couldn't fathom that. What does it look like to bring a family, bring them together and see how they can journey together when they're loved and when you walk alongside them? And that's pretty hard to ignore, that kind of connection you can feel with the people that you serve, and very, very much in relationship. And so the people that we've worked with, they become our family, they're part of our family, and it's not a giving or a doing, it's loving and being in relationship. They give to us, we give to them. And yeah, that's kind of a little bit about my connection to why I'm here and why we exist. Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Jenny. And Ronji, how about you? Your budding legal career, what brought you into this area?
Oh, well, kia ora whānau. Can I just, thanks to Chris and Jenny, I just want to ask the whānau, if you've got any hard questions, give it to them, because that was pretty brilliant what they said. So I really want to acknowledge that. But ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa I raro I ngoa tātou heu karaiti, te whaatalofa atu, but I mamaru au fia le nei aso fia. Look, family, I don't know if I'm the right person to be in this talanoanga or this kōrero, because I believe as a Bible-believing Christian, my focus is to bring the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ to the dark world. My real focus is the eternal destination of people. And, I believe what Paul says, that grace, that salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. But I also acknowledge that what Paul says in Ephesians 2:10, that we are God's workmanship ordained unto good works. And there's a whole bunch of good works that we as Christians are called and are meant to be living out. And so I think how I got into this work is I grew up materially poor. I grew up in a state house with 20, 30, 40 people sometimes living at home, lived in a garage, had all the risk factors that academics and government people like to talk about. We had all the gangs, the drugs, all that kind of stuff in my house, in my neighborhood, but also around us. And so I grew up in that environment, and I grew up materially poor. But I think as I got older, I realized that the real gap in our lives was a spiritual poverty. And that's why I think the gospel is core to whatever transformation that comes. I work as a lawyer and a principal advisor for the Salvation Army. My job is to disrupt and cause as much trouble to government as possible on behalf of the Salvation Army. At the same time, I'm not necessarily here all the time speaking tonight on behalf of the Salvation, but I love my job because my challenge is to bring the truth of the gospel into government, into corporate, and begin to say that you can feed someone, you can clothe them, you can give them some money. Those are wonderful things that have a place. Paul says that in Ephesians 2:10. But I've never seen anything transform a life from the inside out unlike the gospel of Jesus Christ. I will testify to that. My wife and I have been missionaries around the world. We've done human trafficking stuff, Bible smuggling stuff, orphanage stuff, and we've seen whole bunch of stuff in our lives, but nothing transforms a life like the gospel of Jesus Christ. So look, I don't know if I'm the right person for the talanoanga. I guess how I get into this work is I have that trendy word called lived experience. That people love to talk about, growing up in Mangele in South Auckland. But I also have this Western education that God's blessed me with. And so part of bringing that together is how do I use those fish and loaves for the gospel and to bring the transformative power of Christ into the gospel. Now, the last thing I want to share is I had a talk with the big boss of the Salvation Army the other day. The mission of the Salvation Army is to care for people, transform lives, and reform society by God's power. And my challenge to the boss was sometimes we forget the God's power part. We want to do all the caring for people, transforming lives, reforming society, food parcels, addiction, all that kind of stuff. It's wonderful. It has a place. But again, nothing transforms like Christ. That's why I'm in this game, because I should be dead or in prison with where I was heading with life, but by the grace of God.
Mm. Awesome.
Hey, thanks so much, Ronji. Just for the record, I think you might be the right guy to be part of the conversation. So thanks so much for that. And we're looking forward to hearing more of this. Great to hear your passion too. And I think, just to name it, we talked earlier about what is the nature of this conversation, and it's happening within a faith community. It's a public issue, a social issue, but it is around what does it mean for us in the church. And we might say, the sleeping giant of the church is the fact that we hold an answer or something that is different, a treasure that speaks to both the spiritual as well as the material side. So love to hear a little bit more about that and all of your experiences in terms of how you see that play out, transformationally in your areas. Hey, if we sort of transition to looking at poverty as an issue in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and to sort of understand it a little bit more, to give a bit of context, how do we actually define poverty in New Zealand? How do we actually measure it? And what would we say about the scale of it? How widespread is poverty in New Zealand?
I think I might just jump in there in terms of how poverty itself. We often define poverty in terms of financial and economic terms. So we usually do it in terms of what's materially lacking. So things that we don't have, things that we don't have enough money for. And so I think that's usually how government or society defines what poverty is. when you look into what this government has been doing, they're looking at trying to frame it around well-being, which is probably a better discussion because it's more than just economics, as I'm sure we'll all testify to. It's more than just money as such. It's a key player, but it's about the holistic well-being of the person. I will say, though, that government still refuses to add spiritual well-being in part of their measurements of what brings well-being to a person. So I'll leave that for you guys to have a bit of a think about. So usually it's about economic and financial terms. And just in our report that we released a couple of months ago, essentially there are about 211,000 children living in benefit-dependent homes. That's one of the indicators that we use as a society. Basically, there's probably about 660,000 people or people connected to one of the main working benefits. So usually in those kinds of terms, in terms of the 660,000 people on benefits, the connected to a benefit, the 211,000 children in benefit-dependent homes, that's one of the measurements. One of the ones that the Sallies use is the number of people that come in for our food parcels. And so we give out last year we gave out 113,000 food parcels, which is a shock because that's double what we usually give. And that went to about 50 to 60,000 people coming through our door. So that's sort of my perspective of how we measure.
Mm-hmm.
And probably just quickly on social inequity, the degree to which people are able to participate in society, participate in opportunities, access opportunities, whether they even know that they exist and what else is out there when people are trapped in poverty and cycles of poverty and generations of poverty. Even money does not solve that. It doesn't pull people out. And the degree to which we have a responsibility to walk alongside people. Yeah, a little bit about that, and it's systemic. It's systemic injustice that is a part of that, and like you said, Ronji, not just material poverty. There's so much more that is a consequence of that unjust system that flows in. Yeah.
I want to acknowledge you both. I guess I want to acknowledge the Salvation Army because the reality is we have got poverty in New Zealand, not just a little bit, not just on the side, but on a massive scale. And particularly given that we are a country of such blessings and so wealthy in many ways, to have poverty in our country at the scale it is like almost an added poverty. And it's people like Salvation Army, and I think it's very, very important, Ronji, that you continue to shine light. Sometimes that light is more than just light; it's something else that will disturb. Hopefully, it has to be disturbed. I acknowledge you. I acknowledge groups like Child Poverty Action Group, Children's Commissioner. These people who are actually calling it out all the time and not, otherwise I've got this feeling it could just be, that's just something to the side. So, we have significant poverty in our country, economic and spiritual and psychological and all the other ways you can define poverty. I don't myself get caught up into the science of it, percentages, because very quickly what happens is a lot of the stuff around poverty takes us away from the person at the centre. So you just get caught up in statistics, and we're going to, our aim is to reduce it by 1% this year or 2% this year. And if we've reduced it by 2%, whatever the it is, we've succeeded. So I think the most important thing we can always do is put the face, the people around us, that this is about human beings, not statistics. So yes, we have significant poverty in our country. We know it's exactly as you said, Ronji, that the scale of it is we can reinforce that with our work. It's not just something the Salvation Army has made up on the side. It's very real and it's pretty big. When you get at the moment, just in our country of wealth, 20% of our country are living in food poverty, food insecurity in our country. And this is in a country that produces so much wonderful food. This is a company that wastes 40% of everything we produce. This is a country that has so much opulence and wealth on one hand, and then this on the other. So once you get into the whole discussion on poverty, you start to open it up, and you see the nasties like inequity and some of the things we've mentioned already come forth. So it's not just a group of people lacking enough resources to put food on their table or a roof over their head. There's so much more depth to that. And I always go, well, why? What's happened to bring that to that place at the moment?
Can I just talk on what Chris was saying about it's very easy to get caught up in the numbers, and the numbers are helpful. 1 in 4 Pasifika children live in material poverty. 1 in 5 Māori children live in material poverty. And those numbers can be confronting, but again, they're just numbers. But I really want to talk with that. It is about the story and the face and the person. And I think that's the reality of, if we're talking about how we can advocate and fight these good fights. Paul says to Timothy, fight the good fight of faith. So I think part of it is understanding what the numbers might tell us, but beyond that, there's a bigger story than the numbers, and that's the person. And we often use this statistic that there's 22,400 people sitting on the social housing register, so waiting for a house. Half of that number are Māori. It's shocking. That shows the real extreme challenges that Māori are facing around housing. But that's 22,400 applicants. Beyond that, that one applicant represents themselves, or maybe their partner, their children, the seven or so people that are in the house. I think we got to keep coming back to, there's a number, but we need to marry that with the reality of the story. And my wife and I moved back to New Zealand after serving overseas in 2017. Man, this is such a beautiful, wealthy country. We should not have the levels of material deprivation that we see every day. I think it's shocking. We've lived in the Philippines. We've lived in other parts of Africa. Man, there's some extreme poverty there. You come there and see the same stuff here. I think that's not wrong. I think it's a real, we should be, it's a disgrace, to be honest. And we should be really disturbed by those things.
So, Ronji, I think we've been knocking on the door of it, and you just touched on it there. Given that we live in a country like New Zealand, for a lot of people, poverty is out of sight. It's not in plain sight. It's a theoretical, reality that is actually just not part of their perceived reality. And just to sort of understand from what you see and what you observe, what are the sort of what is driving poverty in New Zealand, in a country like ours? Why do we have the levels that we're seeing? And particularly in the overrepresented groups, Māori and Pacifica, why are we seeing the levels we're seeing?
Look, Whānau, I'm not going to romanticize the poor and say that every decision they make is awesome, because the reality is that's not true. But the reality is that poor people make bad decisions, just like middle-class people and wealthy people do. The challenge is that when poorer people make bad decisions, it's because often the options in front of them are not good options. And so they're limited in terms of their options, and often they're limited in terms of the buffers that they can have when they make some bad decisions. I think some of the challenge that, to come back to your question, Johnny, is, look, there's a whole bunch of factors that we've touched on the spiritual one, which I think is critical. There's a whole bunch of factors I think contribute to that, but I think there's a tension in our country and in our political system between collective responsibility and individual responsibility. There's always that fight going on. And I think it's not one or the other issue. I think it's both. And so I think collectively, we as sinful human beings have created a whole bunch of crooked, predatory, dodgy systems and structures out there that prey on people. At the same time, we still, as people, make bad decisions because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so I think when those things come together, I'll give you an example, a personal one. My dad loved my dad. He's passed on, wonderful man, hard man, tough man. He gambled, drank, wasted money. So the systems that were there facilitated those things that he struggled with. At the same time, he made his own decision to do these things. And so I think it's a complex issue, but it is about, I think, what's happening in the systems and structures that need to change, that we need to disrupt from a gospel perspective. At the same time, challenging people individually about responsibility, questioning their decisions, and walking alongside them. So I don't know if that answers fully the question, but I think it's a both and. And I think sometimes on the left or the right, you say it's one or the other, a collective versus individual. I think it is both, and I think we as Christians should advocate for both.
And if I can just add in on that, a huge thing we've seen is a massive growth in family breakdown as well. Particularly as we become more of an individualistic society, we've devalued the emphasis of family, and family does act as that buffer. When there are external circumstances, when somebody loses their job or something happens or the car breaks down or there's health issues or COVID or anything, the family unit acts as a buffer. It keeps people within that unit, and they're more able to re-engage or come back from whatever that disruption was. When there is family breakdown, there isn't that buffer. And so particularly with the approach that we're taking, that government is taking, and they have done for a long time, is looking at an individual in a clinical way and not looking at the family unit or looking at the community unit. And I hope that we're going more down that route, and I think that we are slowly, but particularly with the overrepresentation we're talking about, there is this clinical approach that doesn't acknowledge that some people groups, more so than others, exist in community, they exist in family. And this is something we need to look at. Instead of treating one person as an individual, as a silo, we look at the family, we look at what does it take to make a family whole, to bring someone into community where there is additional support, and we're designed to exist in community. So what does that look like? And what are the buffers that we can create? And as we move away from that, we can see poverty growing in those areas when people don't have that home to go through to, when there's so much trauma that people are running away from home at 12, having to be on the streets. We're not valuing that family unit like we used to, and so we're seeing the results of that. And we see, particularly, we're talking about homelessness in the far north, we see that people are so disconnected, there's no connection, and so people are living in their cars, and then when they do get some sort of temporary housing, how are they able to stay in that when they're unstable, when there isn't that family stability, there is no buffer, so it's moving and cycling between different houses and different homes, and it's just perpetuated in the cycle. So I think the family unit is a big reason as to why we're seeing this.
I support that too. Family is certainly at the heart of this. Jonny, you said that for some people, poverty is not as visible. In some cases, it's even hidden. I'd say probably in our last few years in this country, most New Zealanders have been shocked by the visible sign of homelessness in our country. I don't think you'd go anywhere now in Aotearoa, from the far north where Jenilee is, right down to the bottom, where you would not be aware that we have people who don't have homes. Now, if there's anything that should shake us up, it's that. This is of all fundamental human rights. It's shelter. It's around a home or house that family starts to build. You know, it's so there. And to think that we are living in this country where 40,000 approximately people are homeless, where, you know, we've heard the figures this week, where $1 million a day is spent to keep people in motels. That's the volume of people. Now that's hidden because they're in motels, you see, they're not on the streets anymore, but they're homeless. Those people in motels are homeless. They may not be visible lying in front of the shops, etc. So shining lights on these things are really important, I guess. So the other big thing, and we'll go back again to this, is food. That the shock has been how desperate so many of our whānau are just to not be able to put food on their table, and that's not been so visible. That's quieter. There's a lot of whakamā and shame about that. So people are covering up, and our studies have shown that it's the women of our country who are bearing the burden of poverty exponentially higher than anybody else. It's the woman who will, if there is no food, will go without. It's the woman who won't go to the doctor when there's something necessary and later, you know, will develop. So poverty, even in our own country, isn't equally spread across the genders. It's, again, to our shame, women in our country are bearing the brunt far more than men. And even recently through the COVID, the groups that have lost their jobs more than any other sector are the low paid women in our country. So again, you know, you start, the more you dig in here, the more the whole inequity, you know, things starts to emerge.
Chris,
Johnny, I just wanted to add, Johnny, though, like as a Samoan man, I'm sick and tired of our Pacific numbers in terms of poverty and deprivation and all that. And I won't speak for tangata whenua, but I know that we then you start talking about colonialism and the impacts of that. So I acknowledge all of that. So I think there needs to be a challenge to us ourselves. I say this to Pacific communities all the time. We can't just rely on government to get all the answers here. They're not the big savior here. We need to work out what are the local solutions in our families, as Jenilee said, but also in our local community that we can work and support each other. We do this back home in our villages. Yeah, we come over here and we can't look after each other here. So I think I'm sick and tired of the Māori Pacific numbers, and we're always on that sharper end of the statistics, whether it's housing, food, addictions, whatever it is. And so I think, look, if there's Māori Pacific listening, you might disagree with me, but I think we need to own some of these issues ourselves. And I know we are, but I think there's a challenge out there to say, okay, not just relying on the big government here, how do we work out this stuff as well as get other partners in that journey as well? So yeah, I'm tired of these numbers.
And I want to ask you sort of questions around just some stories of hope and some of that of what you're seeing in your own experience and work. But Chris, can I just ask you around City Mission, because in some ways, you know, it's a focal point for poverty. It's an intense kind of lens through which you know, I guess you see a sort of angle of extreme poverty, homelessness, addiction. And I wonder if you could just sort of speak to what are the characteristics? Is there a common story that you often see in terms of what's causing that? And then also, you know, I guess the focus of the mission around bringing together a holistic solution, you know, in terms of a whole range of services and support in terms of actually bringing people out of those situations. And the interrelated nature of you know, some of that causation. So do you mind just sort of giving us a bit of an insight, a bit of a window into what you see in that regard?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, they always say that poverty is a wicked problem. It's not just one thing causing it. It's not just one group of people. It crosses a whole raft of things. So yeah, I guess we share this somewhat with the Salvation Army. We're at the edge, the very hard edge of desperation. We are often the last port of call, or maybe even the first port of call, when there is nowhere else to go. Like we just had 100 years of work in the city, and every day that door is open, and every day we do not know who's going to come through. And we're seeing now, you know, the numbers of the 501s are coming through, women escaping violent situations coming through, you know, the usual homelessness, the usual food needs, the people who are very, 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 very ill, cannot afford a doctor, you know, so that it has multifaceted. So as I said before, though, in our working with these people, and our work is done like this. We will never call somebody by a statistic. We must know their name, and we must know their story, and we must build up trust. Because what we have found is that so many organizations and so many people and so much in society have let people down. And so there's just a lack of trust, you know? And so building up that from the base can be a long haul. If you're in this game for a quick fix or see something happen overnight, you know, oh, look what I've done, I've saved somebody's life. No, it doesn't work like that. It's generally speaking just a journey of work. But then once that trust starts, that's when we begin to unwrap the severe trauma that has happened in people's lives. So Johnny, I'll keep saying it's almost the common thread or the common theme that is running through just about most of our work now. So much so that we've asked people who are in training facilities in New Zealand, like the medical schools, the social work programs, nursing, to put more on trauma-informed care. And I think the same must be done with ministry as well. If you go through one of our theological colleges and don't understand and know how to work with people who are coming out of that severe trauma, you will not be able to do what we do. You just don't. You're not skilled enough. So having that ability to work in that space and that training is quite important. Otherwise, we can make things a lot worse unintentionally. That's just one comment at this point.
If I can agree with that, very much so. Our organization works with the highest risk families. We get referrals from the Manurewa Marae. We work closely with them. People come to us when there's nowhere else to go, and usually all of their children have been removed by OT. They've attempted suicide. They've nowhere to live. They're completely disconnected from their families. They're just at the worst way. And the same thing with every family that we work with. There's always trauma associated with that, and consequences of poverty as well. It's always down to those early years, and it's just perpetuated over and over. And what you said, Chris, the trust building, that's the biggest thing of what we do, where the families that come to us, they've been to, some of them, between 50 and 100 government programs. They've come out of prison, they've gone into a program, they've come out, box ticking all over the place, and they recognize it just hasn't worked. They get a certificate, they go home, and it's like, cool, thank you, goodbye. And it hasn't worked for them. And so when they come to us, a huge part of what we do is rapport building and trust building, because for them to actually open up and for us to actually get into that space of trauma and address that, we have to build so much trust. So part of that is what we do is when we facilitate our programs, it's called the Family Restoration Program. The whānau don't even speak. We have a couple that go up and they tell their story. They say, this is what I went through. This was my sexual abuse. This was my abandonment. This is the abuse that I went through. These were my issues. This is how I messed up my kids. This is how I messed up my marriage. And look, here is hope. This is how we came out of it. And then the whānau get their own chance to share their story individually when that rapport and trust has already been built. And then we can actually get to the trauma. Once that is done and they're stable, then we do practical things like, let's find you a home. Let's work on getting your kids back. What does it mean to parent? What does it mean to buy groceries? What does it mean to get you what you need so that your home is stable? But that underlying issue is always the deep-rooted trauma that makes people stuck, that they can't see past. They can't see past it to actually live well. And even if we give them those tools that they need to live well, the second something happens, some circumstance happens, it's fallen again. And we've seen that with the housing as well. People get into transitional housing or emergency housing, and the second something happens, there's a death in the family or something, drugs and alcohol come back, people come back, and it's fallen off, and they're looking for the next place. And so the underlying issue of trauma is huge. It's huge in the families that we work with. So I completely agree with you on that one, Chris. Awesome.
Jenny, interesting. At the graduation yesterday, in the lunch queue and then from the front, the two things that I heard people say over and over again was an originating trauma, usually at childhood, which kind of shut life down, and set the trajectory for the rest of life. And then also, the number of people who've done every government scheme, every program, and the common phrase was nothing worked. And so I'm interested to know why that is, but particularly to understand sort of where are you seeing hope? Where are you seeing change? What is working in terms of addressing, some of these critical issues?
So a big thing about, what the families we work with, what they tell us when they talk about those 50 to 100 programs they've been on, is that all of the emphasis was about you and your issues and what's wrong with you. And here's some Band-Aid solutions. Go home, try this step 1, step 2, step 3, and you'll be good. Here's some anger management tips. Here's what you do. But the second something actually happens, it's not realistic because there's nothing there. There's no foundational change. Nothing is actually shifted within them. And so they also say they've been treated as a statistic. It's a box. I saw 10 clients today. I spent half an hour with each of them. And so here is my government paycheck. They didn't feel loved. They didn't feel cared for. And so they would go to these programs and just they would tick the box, and they didn't open themselves up. There's so much trust breakdown, particularly with government agencies, that they just are not interested in bringing the wall down. And so the first thing that they say when they come to us is that for the first time I felt loved. I feel like you love me, and I feel like I can be myself. And they see that in the way that we love them practically, and in, like, anytime we're on call 24/7, people call us into their homes when they need help, and that makes a huge difference. And we relationally walk alongside people for 2 years up to 10 years, and that's the difference. And that's just not something that they've experienced with other organizations and other agencies that they've worked with. But speaking to the actual transformational change, yes, we have to build that trust and we have to love people, but that comes from the love that we carry from Jesus. That is the love that Jesus loves us, and we carry that. We are his ambassadors. With every person that comes to us, we have to exemplify that. We have to show that to people who have never known what love is. They've been hurt in the worst ways by the people who are supposed to love them. And then when they've gone for help, they've been hurt even more. And so people who are just so broken and desperate for help, the first thing we can do is love, and show that love that Jesus tells us to show in every way. And whether that's practical, whether that's emotionally, whether that's spiritually, that's what it is. And so creating that space to address those issues of trauma, and then bringing the person of Jesus into that space, saying, there's nothing we can do to help you with the fact that you have been raped by this particular family member for 10 years from the time you were 3 years old. There's nothing we can do to that. We can't counsel that out of you. And you are stuck in that place from the time that you were a child. You are stuck there. And how can you expect someone to care about whether they should get education or get a job when they are that stuck in that place? We can't do anything. We can love you, but we can't fix that. But you know, it can be fixed, and there is hope. And this comes to the point of our facilitators actually sharing their stories of sexual abuse. And look at me now, there is hope. There is a picture of hope. And the comments we get from our families are, when we see the couples up at the front teaching, they look so put together. And when they open their mouth, they're telling my story. So it's building that relatability that says, you've been through that, but there is hope. Here is the hope. Come and see. And it's good, and you can have that too. And then holding their hand and walking with them as they encounter that, and living that out in the practical steps as well. So,
great.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Jenny. Hey, Ronji, to you. Where are you seeing signs of hope, stories of hope? Are you what's working? Where do you see the sort of light in terms of solutions in this area?
Look, to be honest, bro, I'm not going to, I said it before, I've seen nothing transform my life like Jesus Christ, and just really want to just acknowledge what Jenilee beautifully said. I think, look, people, it's like we don't want to talk about that, but it works. And this stuff, Christianity isn't true because it works because it's true.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the challenge. So again, I've never seen anything change lives like that personally, but also all around me. I think in terms of, if you want a question, an answer that fits this talanoa, I think one of the things that's working really well from a Salvation Army perspective is what we have called recovery churches, which is a church program that happens around the world actually, where those who are on the journey of recovery come in and they journey, whānau, trust, everything that Chris and Jenny have talked about. But again, there's a transition to this is the person of Christ, and this is the one that transformed our lives, and this is what we believe could transform your lives, but it's your decision. So you know what I mean? So I think the recovery churches that the Salvation Army runs are working wonderfully, especially around tangata whenua. There's been a huge influx of Māori coming through. I remember talking to a couple of those that have come through the recovery church. They're involved in some of our other services at the Salvation Army. And so it's the complexity of the poverty that's challenging. So you need some really not complex solutions, but you need some multi-layered solutions as well. Okay, so it isn't just about dealing with the money, the trust, the addictions issue. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. An example is 120,000 people come through the doors of the Sallies. Over half of them have a problem debt issue. Hey, so already we know there's a huge money issue, but when you unpack it, it's food, it's everything else. So look, when we're seeing people come through the social service and get that practical help, it's wonderful at the Salvation Army. But when they start getting pathway to some of the spiritual transformative places like Recovery Church or positive lifestyle programs that the Sallies run, or the church itself that the Sallies run, I think it's amazing. Probably the only other personal one that I add is, look, I'm a terrible businessman, but I've started different businesses over the years in South Auckland purely to try and disrupt that system of our young people, especially our young men in South Auckland going into gangs, because I can't stand that stuff. And so I've seen employment as a really massive circuit breaker into the lives of what's happening and the challenges and the struggles that people have. And so I think when it comes to maybe some of the practical solutions, Recovery Church, lifestyle programs, employment, and one that I think we devalue but is really key is I've seen sports and sports clubs really bring change in people's lives. And I think that these are all levers that we need to push. It's not just one silver bullet in terms of solutions, but there's a whole bunch out there in the community. But again, bro, I won't back off from the fact that only Christ truly changes from the inside out. But there's other practical stuff there that we as Christians or non-Christians as well are involved in that help bring about that transformation.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Ronji. Hey, Chris. Yeah, in terms of the experience at the mission, because as I was saying before, I think there's been a real focus on how do you bring deal with the multi-layered nature of what's going on. How do you bring a range of help and support to situations? What have you seen in terms of hope, and where do you see good pathways?
I, at this stage, am incredibly hopeful for our country, and I think the last year has reinforced that a lot for me, since almost exactly a year ago we all got locked down with level 4. And while I have seen some of the worst and most shameful and wrong, bad things in our country, I think I've also been privileged to see the best of us. And the best of us is pretty awesome. So my hope, where I see hope, is that this country at its core is still very compassionate, generous, kind. There's something there that unites us. I guess at the mission, we, both our clients and all our thousands of volunteers and workers, come from every sector of society, every race, every political party, every philosophy, gender, religion. And somehow in that space, the divisions or what divides us disappear. And I would be struggling sometimes to know, are you Muslim, or are you Christian, or are you anything? There's something that we often see, that in times of great hardship and crises, people come together very strongly. And so this is the hope that I see. And I really want to shout this out. Yes, we've got problems in our country. Yes, there's issues. But at our heart, we are a very generous and compassionate, caring people. That's number one. Number 2 is I am thrilled to see Māori and young Māori rising no longer to be recipients of what we give, but to be the givers. And all of us know, you mentioned Manarewa Marae, Jenilee, that group out there, they are leaders in change. And sometimes all that the likes of us do is somehow get way back in the background and just assist a little bit instead of being at the front. That's what we used to do. We were the front. Our flag was flying the highest. But perhaps it's allowing the other to do this. And so very, very hope-filled in terms of that, a Māori response at the moment. Thirdly is if you acknowledge the mana of the other as equal to or greater than my own, and even though that person is being kicked in the head or down in the street, the power that can come from the person themselves, when I think we've spoken about that today, when they're loved or actually acknowledged, that's when a lot of that transformation starts. Not being a recipient of charity, but being somebody precious in their own right. So add all these things together. I could. It's like an orchestra of all these little instruments floating out there, And sometimes all our role is just to join the bits or be the conductor or the conductress, you know. A lot of the good stuff is happening, and sometimes all we have to do is to bring it together where we're at.
So I want to, just explore this direction a bit more, which I think we've sort of been moving in this direction, and I just want to get into it a bit more explicitly around. I think there is a sort of modern philosophical idea that you get policy right, you get the funding model right, and the government will sort it out, and that's really where the sort of key action is. But what I'm hearing here, which I think is our belief as the Church of Jesus, is that we have something to share here. We have something of value which is potentially decisive in these areas beyond just policy and good funding models. And I want to just explore that a little bit more. I think it's really the sort of key thing for those who are tuning in, and for us as churches and as Christians, is how can we get involved in ways that actually become part of the story of hope and the story of change? What does it actually look like to sort of get involved and to get in on what's happening? Wants to leap in on that one? I know you've been moving in that direction already, but
I can start.
Jenilee wants to start. There you go, Jenilee.
I love what Chris started with, and that's the fact that I don't pity you. I value you, your dignity and mana as a human being. And me not coming in as the savior to come in and help you, actually recognizing who that person is. And so that begins by looking at ourselves. So if we consider the fact that who we are as individuals, what are we outside of Christ? We are vulnerable. We have nothing. We are nothing outside of Christ. And when we are working with the poor, when we're working with anyone who's in a different situation from us, they show us that. They show us that I need to be learning from you. You recognize where you are at outside of Christ. And so there is so much give and take there. There is so much that is reflecting the glory of God when the two come together, because there is mana and there is dignity with every human where they are at. And we exist in a fallen world. We exist in a space where we all participate in an unjust society, in an economic system built on the exploitation of people. That is a given. We all participated in that. We are in a fallen world, but we look at spiritual poverty and material poverty. Even for those who are not living in material poverty, we also have spiritual poverty. Like spiritual poverty knows no color, it knows no economic place in the world. Everyone has something. And when we don't have the issues that come with material poverty, it's easy for us to cover it up and to say, no, I'll buy this and I'll cover this up and mask what is actually going on. And we hide from that, and we hide from the fact that we need the grace of God. When we are working in community, when we're reaching out, when we're doing something, we are reminded that we are exactly the same without Jesus. There is no difference. And that shifts our attitude. To me, that shifts our attitude. It moves from, here, let me come and help you, I pity you, to I am the same as you. And so you build relationship, you build love. You are getting something and you're giving something. When you're giving out of relationship, it's not a duty. It's not just giving out of the extra that I have, it's giving with everything that I have, so that we can create a community, a family right now where we are the same. There is love, there is relationship. And in that, we are demonstrating to the person that we're sharing with the glory of God, the goodness of God. God is coming in and working through the hands and feet of Jesus and coming and assisting in whatever material way. But also, we are reminded of the fact that we need Jesus in that space. And so there is so much giving and so much receiving in both ways. And it has to exist in relationship. It has to exist in relationship, in community. And what does that look like? What does it look like for us as our little family to look outside of our little family and say, who is out there? The orphans, the widows, the people in material poverty, bring them in. There are so many organizations that we can be involved in. Like, there's mentoring for young people. There's beautiful things that you can be doing, but not out of a place of duty, in relationship. Who can I bring to my table? Who can I open up my table to? Who can yes, I go to church on Sunday, but what other communities could I be investing in? Who can I go to and meet and talk to? And also in the way that we do church, so much of the issues that we face is that the families come to us, they're leaving their gangs, they're leaving other things. How do we put people back into beautiful community, like wholesome community, good community? Because when they go to the church, they're rejected by the church, they're not welcome, they're not good enough, they don't look a certain way. This is such an issue that we've been facing. And so what does it look like for the church to put down their barriers and say that you are accepted and loved exactly as you are? Come, and we will walk alongside you. Come to my house, come and visit me, come and spend time with my family, and let's look at how we do family, breaking down our barriers and bringing people into our space and being the hands and feet of Christ in every way that we can. What does that look like? And what does it mean to just open up, just put the barriers down and bring people in? Because that requires vulnerability. It requires taking off our church mask and saying, this is who I am. Look at me. I've been through this as well, and I love you, and come into the space. And we've built partnerships with churches. There's this amazing church in the far north, and they've done that. They recognize that we haven't been doing this and teach us how to do it. And we're working with Elam and Manarewa, and they're doing the same thing. And it's just incredible when we put down those barriers and we say, come as you are. I love you. Come in. And yeah, that's a little bit about how we can start that.
Okay, I'll jump in before Chris has the other answers as well. That was beautifully said by Jenilee. Actually, I was quite captured by all of that. So, look, I won't disagree that much from what Jenny has said. I guess to come back to your original question, how do Christians get involved in that sense, and get involved in this kind of work? I would say, firstly, preach the gospel. Christ died, was buried, and rose again for our sins. That's the game changer, man. And I think sometimes we're too caught up in action and social justice-y stuff, which has a place. But I think it's both and. But I think sometimes we as Christians forget that the why we do that. We're good at the what. Hey, let's go and eat and help and all that kind of stuff. That's wonderful. But I think sometimes we're too scared in this postmodern, politically correct world to tell people why we do it. And so I think that's really critical. And so my first encouragement, preach the gospel. Our Christian's job is not to save anyone. Our job is to point to the one that can. So that's the first one. I think second one, I think Jenilee said stuff really beautifully. The only thing I would add is get disturbed by it. Hey, if you want to look at these numbers, look at these stories, get disturbed by what's wrong in our communities, in our society, and actually work out what are the good works. Hey, coming back to Paul in Ephesians 2:10, what are the good works that God's called us to do, and do them. Shucks, that's what we're meant to do as believers, as the evidence of our salvation, not the means. And so I think get disturbed by the information, learn the stories, understand what's happening, but actually go out and actually try and do something about it. And again, the value about the mana, the honoring of the people walking alongside, all that stuff is legit. It's solid. I get all of that. I think the other part is sometimes I just don't think people are disturbed by this stuff enough to say, well, actually, that stuff's not right. So how do we contribute to the things to try and challenge that? And can I just quickly say, look, I'm not a believer in big government. We rely too much on government. We're waiting for funding and funding regimes and all that kind of stuff. And government loves what the Salvation Army does. They just don't really like why we do it. And so I think the challenge here is don't just wait on government funding to do stuff. Do stuff in your own local community. And let's go start a charitable trust here. That might be part of it, but let's just have kai with people, man. Just care for people. Man, I grew up in Mangere where everyone knew everyone, and we knew where the drugs were, where the gangs were, where the good people, the good houses were. We knew all this stuff. Now we're just so isolated and living in our own little bubbles, even before bubbles were trendy. And so I think I just really encourage people to just live as Christians are meant to live. Hey, and Christians are meant to disrupt the systems that we are for God's glory, whether it's a systemic, structural system that we live in that is wicked, or whether it's the personal decisions that we as people are making. I think our challenge is to bring Christ to that, not just in works, but also with the declaration of God.
Gosh, we're violently agreeing here on everything. It's terrific. really just to say that I certainly echo all those things. Knowing a little bit of St. Paul's, Johnny, I think there's a lot of your community who are disturbed, and I think that's a good thing. I don't know, you know, I've in my connect with so many of your people, I feel that, you know, there's not this, oh, this is it, this is this comfort zone, there's something else happening there. So from my perspective, Christianity, it's not about a set of doctrines that we adhere to or a set of rituals that we religiously follow. It's at its core, it's our relationship with Jesus is the core of what this is about. And for me, it's simply when I just say to people, Jesus, where is Jesus today? Where is Jesus? It's that big question. And once you know where Jesus is, then relate. You do to me. Where am I today? Find me, listen to me, and connect with me who is in your midst today. And you don't have to be in some flash cathedral for that necessarily. So I think there was a time when I would have been quite prescriptive. I was saying, oh, well, you're Christians a bit like you, Ronji. You've got to do this, go out and do this, and that'll get you there. But I don't know. I think now it's more you just enter into that relationship with the other, as we've talked about tonight, and let that relationship take you and guide you. Your spirit and their spirit together will show you the way. I don't have to tell you what that is for you because it's different for everybody. You know, you just got to respect that. But that will only come when you're brave enough to step over the line and really enter into the relationship with the other who may not normally do so. When you're brave enough to really listen without having the answer first. Listen, whakarongo. It's in that. Then I believe you will be led. That's my kind of feeling today. There was a time also where I said, part of our mission is to give voice to the voiceless. We will be their voice. Well, how arrogant in a way that is too. These people have voices. It's just that we don't listen. So just enabling the voice or tuning into the voice. It might be not the kind of voice we're normally used to, but it's there. We don't have to be the voices of. Just listen to the voice and enable that voice to spring forth. So the answer is no longer, for me, it's getting simpler as I get older, not more complex. When I think we've touched on a number of those things tonight. Really, at its heart, it's not that complex. It's just if you're prepared to cross that line.
Johnny, can I just quickly add? Can I just give a South Auckland perspective, which is the capital of the whole city, the whole world, really, Mangere, South Auckland. Anyway, can I just give a perspective there? I think sometimes people think it's about coming to save the brown person. And I think, and the church has been at fault at that as well, because everyone rushes to South Auckland to come and save us. So I think there's a challenge there. I think Jenilee touched on it as well. What's happening in your own community? It might be a spiritual lack or an emotional thing that is covered up by wealth and stuff. Hey, that's what people do, stuff. And during level 4 and 3 lockdown last year, we had 10,000 brand new clients. Brand new people come through the Salvation Army doors who've never used our services before. The majority of them were white middle-class Pākehā. Hey, they were living mortgaged to the hilt. They were living beyond their means. And when one of those dominoes started falling, all the other dominoes, they lost their job, everything else started falling. And so, again, there was real challenge. And I guess this is part of the changing faces of hardship. There is some Māori Pacifica disproportionately represented. I'm sick and tired of those numbers, but that's the reality. But actually, there's pockets of other things happening in our local communities as well. And I think sometimes it's just about being aware and looking. If people want to come to save South Auckland, then go hard. But what I'm saying is there's stuff happening in our other communities, our rural communities, that we can walk alongside with, not just come with a paternalistic answer. So I guess that's me as a hearty South Aucklander, just to say, look, we love people that want to walk alongside, but we've been guinea pigged and researched and over surveyed and over missionized in the sense. And so I think it's about working alongside those communities to see what are the local answers as well, and looking in your own backyard as well. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out because I get a bit tired about that stuff, but that's just me personally.
No, it's a great perspective. Guys, thank you so much for your time and your perspectives, and I just feel like it's really opened up, something that can feel a bit amorphous, a bit sort of one-dimensional for people. It's just sort of brought insight from all your different perspectives, and I just want to give you an opportunity to sort of share a final thought. It might be a sort of a final challenge. For example, Chris, over your 5 years, what is it that you'd like to leave people with in terms of a perspective on poverty, or a sort of final challenge, and just for all of you, in terms of, is there something that surprised you in this area, or a challenge that you'd like to put out to people as we sort of close out tonight?
Yeah, I guess it's just echoing a theme, Jonny, that I've kind of touched on a few times tonight. There's a wonderful authoress, Chimamanda Adichie from Nigeria, who has done an amazing TED talk really on the danger of the single story. And what I've learned over the last 5 years is that we have stories, and we'll reinforce those with people we like, or we can go and get more information that will reinforce that story. And the story might be right to a point, but it's not, my point is, it's not the only story. So, and I just really want to reinforce what I would like to leave is that this poverty that we've got in New Zealand, this inequity that is growing in our midst, put the person in the centre, discover the story that you might not know already, admit your own racism, admit your own prejudice, or admit your own misunderstanding or ignorance, and start to uncover that. It's serious though. This is something we cannot and must not live with and accept. That's what many countries are doing. They're saying, oh, well, that's the reality of the Western world or of the modern world today. If we fall into that trap, we are in deep trouble, and more shame on us. We must not accept what is in our community. You know, Gandhi himself said, poverty is the worst form of violence. You know, we cannot, we must do what we're doing and what you're doing tonight, and all of us are doing to move that forward. My message to the churches at the moment is, churches are well endowed in our country, and start giving up some of your land and your resources, your land, so that we can build houses on that as well. The solution is not just around the government doing stuff, as Ronji said, all of us equally. So every time you think of, the government should be blooming doing this, we've got to be doing it as well. So this is a challenge for all of us.
It's a good challenge. Ronji, let me ask you, in the Salvation Army report, one of the sort of phrases used a lot is this idea of being disturbed, and particularly this idea of, we've had a pandemic. It's been used really as a way of kicking the can down the road. We've got a new problem. It's hard to deal with the existing problems, sort of delaying things. It's making things harder. But you use that disturbance as really a way of, this is potentially an opportunity to be disturbed and to change the status quo. How do we exploit that opportunity?
Yeah, I think the quote of the report was based on one of the co-founders of the Salvation Army, Catherine Booth, who said, to better the future, we must disturb the present. And I think that's the challenge that we've had, because we've been absolutely disturbed and disrupted socially and health-wise with this pandemic. I think the opportunities that drop out of that is the chance to bring about key change. I think just coming back to the last, I feel like I'm about to die with the last words here, but I guess the last words that I would have is that whether there's pandemic or no pandemic, whatever the situation is, I think our job as Christians is to continue to point people to Christ, and at the same time be involved in the things that bring about part of that transformational change. I think sometimes we're caught up in the social justice stuff without the gospel, and people can debate that theologically. I'm happy to have that debate, but I think the challenge is it's a both and. And so I think that's the reality that we as Christians, or as people, I think, but Christians especially should be understanding and seeing what these numbers and seeing what these stories are, and as Chris said, seeing beyond your own story and what else is happening out there in the world, and get disturbed by these things. But you got to be disturbed to action. If you're just disturbed, and if the action is prayer, awesome. But if it's just sort of disturbed and nothing else happens, I think, well, what a waste of time. I think life is urgent. Life is a vapor. We're here 1 minute, gone the next. So go hard, point people to Christ, do all the good works that God's called you to do, and bring about change in this world. I think look, I'm a simple guy. I think I'd bring about, just leave it at that. I mean, I'd point people. I would just re-emphasize, nothing changes like the gospel, man. We do so much evangelism out there in the markets and mangere, and I talk to the neighborhood, talk to people, and we have these gospel conversations about sin and hell and redemption, forgiveness, but then we wrap around that what's happening in life, all these things, have these discussions literally in the marketplace. And I think that's the challenge, is to be able to be authentically giving both a gospel message, but also bearing fruit in terms of the work.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Jenilee's got all the answers.
How about you, Jenny? The final words are with you.
Yeah. I think for me personally, when it comes to the Great Commission that we're given, we are to go out and preach the gospel. That is given to everyone. We are all ministers of the gospel. We all have a responsibility. We all have a platform, whatever that is, whether it's in our homes, whether it's in our family, in our community, we all have a platform. And we have this world that is suffering with material poverty. We have the rest of us, everyone who is suffering spiritual poverty. And let's build a bridge. What does that look like? It requires vulnerability. It requires being open. It requires, yes, telling the gospel, but showing it as well. Show the hope. This is what Jesus did for me. This is what I was going through. You don't need to put your church mask on. Be vulnerable with what you've come through. Because if we are sitting in the space, if we are sitting in St. Paul's Church, if we have experienced the person of Jesus, that has done something to us. We are never the same. Whatever it is, as tangible as it is, that is a story, and people connect with that, however that looks. And whether you say it, whether you show it, whatever it is, Jesus has done something to you personally. Talk about that. Show that. Bring someone into your home, whatever that looks like. Put down your walls. It's not over there. It's not far away. It's right here. It's someone in your family. It's someone that you've seen in your workplace. Whatever it is, start there. You have a platform, and you are a minister of the gospel, and you have something in you that they need. So give it to them in whatever way you know how. Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, I want to just thank you all for your for what you're doing, your passion, your experience, your insights that you brought to this area for us tonight. And Ronji, thanks for joining us again for the second time. We're looking forward to having you finally in St. Paul soon in the flesh. So we were looking forward to that. Jenny, thank you so much for just the privilege of being there yesterday, and just the incredible impact of what you guys are doing. Out there in South Auckland and far north, incredible work, and just so inspiring, seeing that taking shape in real people's lives. So thank you for having us out there. And Chris, I just want to thank you for your the last 5 years that you have just poured into the City Mission. You've been an incredible ambassador, but what I want to say is you've been an incredibly hospitable partner, the way that you've welcomed churches and other groups into the work of the mission. Not in a way of a sort of heavy burden, but just such an open door and such a generous way that you've involved so many in that. So thank you, and we are praying for you that you have a wonderful time of rest and replenishment up in the north again, and we're praying that God has the next thing lined up for you. So hey, God bless you all heaps. Ngā mihi, thanks everyone for joining us tonight, and please share this. We'd love others just to sort of hear the insights, to be passionate about this and get involved. It's an important issue. So, hey, bless you everyone. Thanks for being involved, and go well. See you soon.
Thank you.